By noon, the sky had lowered until the tops of the firs disappeared into it. Jonah Calder stood behind his cabin with a splitting maul in both hands and listened to the weather gathering above the ridge. The wind came down in hard, cold breaths, carrying the smell of iron and wet stone. Somewhere beyond the white pines, a dead branch snapped. The sound traveled cleanly through the thin air, then was swallowed by the rising hiss of snow. He set the last length of cedar on the block and split it with one stroke. The two halves dropped into powdery snow. He stacked them under the lean-to, counted what remained, and decided it would do. 3 days, perhaps 4, if he kept the stove low at night and closed the sleeping loft. The old mare had hay in the shed. The spring box was covered. The chimney had been swept in October. There was no more work worth dying for. Jonah lifted the basket of kindling and started toward the porch. He had gone 6 paces when something dark moved at the edge of the clearing. At first he thought it was a branch rolling in the wind. Then the shape rose halfway, staggered and fell. He dropped the basket. The storm struck in earnest as he crossed the clearing. Snow came sideways, fine and hard enough to sting his eyelids. The figure lay near the narrow path from the lower pass, one arm buried beneath her and the other stretched toward the cabin as though she had been crawling. "Can you hear me?" The wind tore the words away. Jonah knelt and brushed snow from the stranger's face. She was a young woman, perhaps 24 or 25, with dark hair frozen to her cheek. Her wool coat was good cloth but too light for the altitude. One boot had lost its heel. The leather was soaked through. When he touched 2 fingers beneath her jaw, he found a weak, uneven pulse. She took a shallow breath and made a sound no louder than a child sighing in sleep. Jonah slid one arm beneath her shoulders and another under her knees. As he lifted her, something caught against the button of her coat. A blue stone swung free of her scarf. He stopped. The turquoise was set in old silver, not polished for display but darkened at the edges from years against skin. Copper-brown lines crossed the stone in a pattern Jonah knew as well as the scars on his own hands. He had seen that pattern beside a fire when he was 9 years old, while an old man explained why one object had to become 2. Snow gathered on the woman's lashes. Jonah pushed the memory aside and carried her into the cabin. He barred the door, laid her on the rug near the stove, and moved with the plain efficiency that winter required. He took off her wet coat and boots, wrapped her in 2 wool blankets, and tucked cloth-covered warming stones beside her ribs and thighs. He did not put her too close to the fire. Old Tomas had taught him that frozen flesh could be hurt by kindness given too fast. The woman's hands were pale and stiff. Jonah warmed them against his own palms, slowly watching for color. He mixed a little willow bark with hot water, then left it to steep. The cabin filled with steam, wood smoke, wet wool, and the faint resinous smell of the cedar salve he kept in a brown jar above the stove. Only when her breathing had steadied did he look again at the pendant. It rested outside the blanket, blue against gray. The silver frame had a shallow notch on one side. Jonah reached beneath his shirt and pulled out the piece he had worn for 21 years. His stone was smaller and flatter, attached to a leather cord. Along one edge, the dark veining ended abruptly. When he placed it beside hers without touching, the broken lines continued from one stone to the other. The fit was not perfect in shape, but the markings were. Jonah sat back on his heels. Old Tomas had said the second piece had gone down into the valley, with a woman and an infant during the first survey fights. He had said the woman's name must not be spoken where strangers could hear it. If men searching for ore believed the piece was lost, they might stop hunting the child who carried it. For years Jonah had assumed both mother and child were dead. Now the child, grown into a woman, had crawled through a blizzard to his door. He looked toward the barred entrance. The storm had erased the path behind her, but it would not erase whoever had driven her into the mountains. The woman began to shiver violently. Jonah set the turquoise pieces apart and returned his beneath his shirt. He added a log to the stove, wrung out her scarf, and hung it from a peg. A folded paper fell from the inner seam of her coat. He picked it up only to keep it from the wet floor. The paper had been protected by oilcloth, but one corner was torn. On the outside, someone had written a name in a careful, faded hand. Mara Whitaker. Jonah placed the packet on the table without opening it. Near dusk, Mara woke with a cry and tried to stand. Her legs failed beneath her. She struck the edge of the table with one shoulder and knocked a tin cup to the floor. Jonah, who had been trimming a lamp wick, rose but did not approach. "Easy," he said. "Your feet are cold damaged. You put weight on them now, you'll make it worse." She dragged herself backward until the wall stopped her. Her eyes moved over the single room. The stove, the rifle above the mantel, the bundles of dried herbs, the man standing near the lamp. Her right hand flew to her throat. The pendant was there. She clutched it so hard the chain cut into her fingers. Where am I? My cabin. North side of Alder Pass. Her breathing quickened. How far from Juniper Wells? 20 miles by the lower trail. More in this weather. She stared at the barred door. Did anyone follow me? I found only you. That isn't what I asked. Jonah lowered the match he was holding. I saw no riders. She searched his face as though trying to decide which kind of lie he had chosen. He was used to that look. In the valley, people saw his dark hair, his mother's cheekbones, the old scar along his jaw, and often decided what he was before he spoke. Mara's gaze moved to the rifle. Jonah crossed the room slowly, took the weapon from its hooks, and placed it on the far side of the table. Then he unbuckled the knife at his waist and set it beside the rifle. You're hurt, he said. There's broth if you can hold a bowl. The door is barred because of the wind, not because of you. Open it. The snow is higher than the porch step. Open it. He did. The wind forced the door against his shoulder. Snow spun into the room and scattered across the floorboards. Beyond the porch was a moving wall of white. Mara could not see the shed 30 feet away. Jonah stood aside. She stared into the storm. Her hand loosened from the pendant. After several seconds, she said, "Close it." He dropped the bar back into place and swept the snow away with a worn straw broom. He made no comment when she pulled the blanket more tightly around herself. "My coat," she said, "drying by the stove. Your paper is on the table. I didn't open it." Mara looked toward the oilcloth packet. Some of the fear left her face, though not much. Jonah poured broth from a blackened pot. It held venison, barley, and onions small enough to have survived winter in the root cellar. He set the bowl on the floor halfway between them and went back to the lamp. She watched him for a long time before crawling toward it. Her fingers shook around the spoon. After the first mouthful, she shut her eyes. Jonah pretended not to notice. They passed the evening in the careful silence of strangers. Mara ate half the broth, slept for an hour, woke when the wind shook the shutters, and asked for water. Jonah gave it to her in the same tin cup she had knocked down. He checked the feeling in her toes and stopped the moment she flinched. "Frostbite?" she asked. "Not deep, I think. You'll keep your feet if you let them rest." "You a doctor?" "No." "Then how do you know?" "I've been cold before." That answer seemed to satisfy her more than a longer one would have. After midnight, the storm settled into a steady roar. Jonah sat near the stove repairing a split rain. Mara lay on the narrow bed he had given her, though her eyes remained open. "You knew the stone," she said. His hand stopped. "When you found me," she continued, "I remember you looking at it." Jonah set down the awl. "I knew the setting was old. You knew more than that." He looked at her. She had pulled herself upright against the wall. Firelight showed the strain around her mouth. "Who are you?" she asked. "Jonah Calder. That name means nothing to me. It's still my name. Are you with Sloan?" "No." Her eyes narrowed at his quick answer. "You know him. I know of him. Everyone knows of him now." Gideon Sloan had arrived in the territory 5 years earlier, with money from Eastern investors and the polite manners of a man who had never been told no for long. He bought failed ranches after dry seasons, loaned money against water rights, and paid surveyors to discover boundaries that favored him. By the time people understood his method, their fences, springs, and debts all pointed toward his office. Jonah had met him only once, at a land hearing in Fort Apache. Sloan had spoken softly while describing families as occupants and burial places as views or ground. Men like him could make theft sound like bookkeeping. "Mara Whitaker," Jonah said. "That's the name on your paper." She glanced at the table. "I didn't read it. You expect me to believe that?" "No. Belief is yours." The answer made her angry, perhaps because it left her nothing to push against. She swung her feet off the bed. Jonah rose. "Don't. I need my coat. You need blood in your feet. I need to leave before the storm clears." She tried to stand and nearly folded. Jonah caught the back of a chair instead of catching her. She gripped the chair, breathing through the pain. "They'll find me here," she said. "Who?" "Sloan's men. Sheriff Pike. Anyone who wants $500. The amount explained the broken boot, the mountain path, and the terror in her sleep. "What does Sloan say you stole?" Jonah asked. Her hand covered the turquoise. Jonah waited. Mara lowered herself onto the chair. "He calls it a claim marker. Says my mother took it from a mine office before she disappeared. He says it proves where the old marrow lode begins. There is no marrow lode. You sound certain." I know these mountains, he has maps. So do children. A breath that was almost a laugh escaped her, surprising both of them. It vanished quickly. My foster father died in November, she said. He left me the ranch, or tried to. Sloan produced a debt note with my father's signature. The note gave him the property if the debt wasn't paid by New Year's. I found letters hidden under the floor in my father's room. One was from my mother. It said the turquoise must never go to anyone who asked for it with money in hand. Did it say why? No. The last page was missing. And Sloan knew about the letter? He came the next morning. Jonah's gaze moved to the packet on the table. Someone in the house told him, the housekeeper's son works in Sloan's stable. Or it could have been the lawyer. It could have been Sheriff Pike. At this point, I don't care which rat carried the crumb. She spoke bitterly, but her voice broke on the last sentence. She looked down at the blanket over her knees. Mr. Whitaker wasn't your blood father. Jonah asked no. He and his wife took me in after my mother died. Mrs. Whitaker died when I was 12. After that, he drank more than he spoke. Mara rubbed the base of her thumb, where a pale rope scar crossed the skin. He wasn't cruel every day. That made the cruel days harder to name. Jonah did not ask for details. Outside, a drift slid from the roof with a soft collapse. Mara looked at him again. Now tell me why you knew the stone. Jonah went to the table. He took his pendant from beneath his shirt and laid it beside the lamp. The room became very still. Mara stood too quickly and caught herself on the chair. Where did you get that? From a man named Tomas. He gave it to me when I was 9. Did he know my mother? He knew the woman who carried the other half away. Her face changed. Suspicion remained, but beneath it came something more dangerous, hope. Jonah moved his piece closer to hers, stopping before the stones touched. Look at the brown veins. Mara leaned forward. The markings met across the gap. For several seconds she made no sound. Then she whispered, what are they? A way of finding a place that was meant to stay hidden. A mine? No, Sloan believes it is. Sloan believes every dark place in the earth is waiting for him to empty it. Mara picked up her pendant and turned it over. My mother died for this. Maybe she lived as long as she did because of it. That sounds like something people say when they want grief to behave. Jonah met her eyes. Then don't let it behave. The words left a raw quiet between them. He drew a clean flower cloth from a drawer and set both stones on it. The silver backs were scratched and blackened. A series of tiny marks ran along the rims, too regular to be decoration. Jonah had tried to copy the marks from his piece when he was younger, but alone they formed nothing. Mara held her half beside his. 2 arcs became one line. Small cuts aligned into the outline of a ridge and a dry wash. It is a map, she said. Part of what? Jonah remembered Tomas's warning. Never give the whole truth to someone simply because they carried half of it. A burden could be inherited without understanding. Trust had to be chosen. But Mara had crossed a mountain in a blizzard rather than hand the stone to Sloan. To a valley above Blacktooth Ridge, he said. There is water there year-round. Burial places, winter shelter. A seam of silver too, though that isn't why it was hidden. Mara's face hardened. That is all Sloan needs to hear. He won't hear it from me. What if he comes with the sheriff? He will. And then? Jonah looked toward the roof beams, listening to the wind push at the cabin. Then we decide before he does. Mara stared at him. We? You brought the other half. I didn't bring it to you. I was lost. That doesn't change where you arrived. She turned away, offended by any suggestion of fate. Jonah did not blame her. Fate was often the name given to choices made by people with more power. He separated the stones and returned his to his neck. Mara kept hers in her palm. You should sleep, he said. I've slept enough in places where people made decisions over me. Then stay awake, but keep your feet off the floor. He spread his bedroll beside the door and lay down in his coat. Mara watched him. You're giving me the bed? You're injured. That isn't an answer. It's the only one I have. She said nothing more. Long after the lamp was extinguished, Jonah heard the quiet click of the oilcloth packet being opened. Paper rustled near the stove. Once Mara drew a breath as though struck. He kept his eyes closed. In the morning, the storm had not ended, but the cabin felt different. Mara sat at the table with her father's letters arranged before her. She had braided her dark hair with a strip cut from the torn lining of her coat. Jonah fried cornmeal mush in a little bacon grease and put a portion on her plate. She studied it. Is this breakfast or building material? Depends how long you leave it. She tasted a corner and made a face. Building material. Jonah poured coffee into 2 cups. You can complain after the second bowl. I won't survive the first. Her dry tone was the first ordinary thing she had offered him. He took it without comment. Sunless light pressed against the frost-covered windows. The storm had softened enough that individual flakes could be seen, but the drifts were waist-high. Jonah would have to dig to the shed before the mare ran out of water. Mara noticed him watching the door. "What needs doing? Nothing you can do. I can sit and windrope, mend, peel onions. I am not made of glass. No, glass is less stubborn." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "You make jokes as if each one costs money. They do. What do you buy with the savings?" Quiet. This time she laughed. It was brief, rough from cold, and immediately covered by a cough. Still, the sound warmed the small room in a way the stove had not. Jonah found her a pair of thick socks, and one of his old shirts to wear beneath her dress while her clothes dried. He turned his back while she changed behind a hanging quilt. When she emerged, the sleeves covered her hands and the shoulders hung loose, but color had returned to her face. She spent the morning repairing the torn seam of her coat with black thread. Jonah dug a path to the shed, brought in water, fed the mare, and checked the roof braces. Each time he returned, Mara looked up sharply. By the third trip, she no longer reached for the poker beside her chair. At noon, he spread a rough map of the ridge on the table. It showed springs, game trails, avalanche cuts, and old fire scars. It did not show the hidden valley. Mara placed the paired stones near the north edge. "The line points here. Only if the back of the silver is warmed. How do you know?" Soot fills the cuts. Gentle heat clears it. Jonah held each setting near the stove, turning it slowly. The metal warmed. As the old residue loosened, tiny etched grooves sharpened across the backs. When the two pieces were aligned, the grooves completed a route from Alder Pass through a narrow canyon and up to a cleft in Blacktooth Ridge. Mara traced the path without touching. Sloan has survey crews near the lower canyon. He knows the direction, not the entrance. Then someone else told him part of the story. Or he found one of the old survey journals. My father had ledgers from before I was born. Mara looked toward the letters. Maybe that's why Sloan kept him in debt. He wasn't buying the ranch. He was buying whatever my father knew. What did Whitaker know? Not enough to tell me while he was alive. She opened the oldest letter. The paper had split at the fold. My mother wrote that she trusted him because he had once brought food to a camp after soldiers drove families off the river. She asked him to give me a valley name if it became safe. He never did. Jonah sat opposite her. Maybe he thought silence was safety. Silence was easier for him. The words were flat, but she smoothed the edge of the letter with care. Jonah said, "Both can be true." Mara's eyes lifted. For a moment she looked angry, then the anger tired and left. "What was your mother's name?" she asked. "Ruth Calder in town, Ishkosh in her family. You speak her language?" "Some. Not enough." "Why not?" "Because she died when I was 6, and my father believed English would keep me from being noticed." "Did it?" Jonah touched the scar along his jaw. "Not always." He told her about Tomas, a friend of his mother's older brother, who had taken him into the mountains after his father was killed in a logging accident. Tomas knew the old routes, the springs that did not freeze, the places where families had sheltered during forced removals. He also knew men were searching for a silver seam recorded in a military scout's report. To protect the valley, he and 2 metal workers had split a piece of turquoise from an older family ornament and set each half in marked silver. One remained with a guardian in the high country. The other went with Mara's mother and infant Mara into the ranching settlements. It wasn't magic, Jonah said. It was a lock. 2 people had to agree before anyone could follow the route. And now one of those people is dead. Thomas may not be. Mara frowned. "You said he gave you the stone 21 years ago. He left the ridge 12 winters back. I heard he was living near Sibicu, then nothing. You think he could still be alive?" "I think Tomas was difficult to kill." She folded her arms. "That sounds like admiration. It is mostly complaint." Mara smiled at the map. Then the smile faded. "If Sloan's reaches the valley, what happens? He brings engineers. They blast the ridge. The spring muddies. Graves are opened. Men arrive. Then roads, mills, and waste piles. You've seen that before. At Copper Run. Water turned gray in one season. Cattle refused it. 3 children became sick. Mara's fingers closed around the pendant. Then we cannot let him have it. The word we came from her this time." Jonah heard it. He did not point it out. By evening the wind had dropped. Snow still fell, but gently now, settling on the window ledge instead of striking it. Jonah made biscuits in a Dutch oven. Mara peeled 2 shriveled apples from the cellar and cooked them with molasses until the cabin smelled sweet. They ate at the small table. The meal was plain, but the act of sharing it shifted something between them. Mara asked why there was only one chair with a straight back, and learned Jonah had built the other from a barrel. Jonah asked how she had crossed the lower creek and learned she had crawled over a fallen cottonwood while Sloan's riders searched the road. "Your boot heel came off there?" he asked. "No. It came off when I kicked a man." Jonah looked at her. "He had hold of my coat. Did he let go?" "Eventually." A quiet satisfaction touched Jonah's mouth. After supper, Mara opened the final letter. Unlike the others, it was addressed directly to her in Whitaker's uneven hand. She read silently. Her face tightened. "What does it say?" Jonah asked. "That he was sorry." Jonah waited. "He admits the debt note is real. He borrowed from Sloan after 2 bad winters, but he says the amount was changed after he signed it. He also says there is a witness, a clerk named Edwin Lark, who copied the original before Sloan took the ledger. Is Lark alive? Where did he live? Juniper Wells." Jonah knew the name. Lark had been a thin, nervous man who wrote deeds and drank peppermint water for his stomach. 6 months earlier, he had disappeared from town. Mara read the last lines again. "My father says the proof is hidden in the courthouse stove. The stove behind the fire brick. He writes as though he expected me to understand. The old courthouse stove was replaced in October. Where did the old one go?" Jonah thought. Sheriff Pike bought it for the jail office. For the first time, Mara looked less hunted than focused. Then Sloan may not own the law as completely as he thinks. No. But he owns enough men to make proof difficult to carry. She folded the letter and placed it back in oilcloth. "I ran because I thought staying meant losing the pendant. Perhaps I was wrong. You were alive long enough to reach here. That was not wrong. I don't want to spend the rest of my life running from one correct choice to another. Jonah took the kettle from the stove. Then rest until your feet heal. After that, choose the next thing." Mara looked at him through the steam. "You make it sound small. Most choices are small when you make them. They only become large when you look back." That night she slept without waking. Jonah did not. Near dawn, he heard a faint metallic chime beyond the wind. A horse's bit. He rose, dressed, and lifted the rifle from the table. Mara opened her eyes at once. "What is it? Someone on the lower trail." "Sloan? One horse." Jonah pulled on his coat and stepped into the blue-gray morning. The storm had left the world without edges. Snow rounded the fence posts, buried the woodpile, and filled the path Jonah had dug the day before. A rider moved between the trees below the clearing, bent close over the neck of a dun horse. Jonah waited on the porch with the rifle held low. The rider raised one gloved hand. "Owen Pike," he called. "I can see that." Sheriff Pike urged the horse forward until it reached the edge of the clearing, then stopped. He was a broad, tired man in a buffalo coat, with ice on his mustache and a badge dulled by weather. His horse's flanks shook from the climb. "You planning to shoot me from there?" Pike asked. "Depends why you climbed." Pike looked at the rifle, then at the cabin. "I came alone." "That answers how many. Not why." The sheriff dismounted stiffly. He did not approach the porch. He took off one glove and rubbed his fingers against his coat. "Gideon Sloan has 23 men camped near the sawmill," he said. "He says Mara Whitaker stole company property, forged a transfer, and assaulted one of his employees. She did kick him." Pike's eyebrows lifted. "So she is here." Jonah said nothing. "Damn you, Calder. You already knew. I followed blood on the cottonwood where one of Sloan's men split his lip. Her trail turned north. Then the storm covered it." Pike glanced at the drifts. "Nobody else could have survived up here. She did. That is not the same as being safe." The cabin door opened behind Jonah. Mara stepped onto the porch, wearing Jonah's heavy coat over her dress. Her feet were wrapped in thick socks and oversized moccasins. One hand gripped the doorframe, but her voice was steady. "What charge have you written down, Sheriff?" Pike's face tightened. "Miss Whitaker, you should be inside. I've spent enough time being told where I should stand." The sheriff removed his hat. Snow settled on his thinning hair. "Sloan filed a complaint," he said. "He has a signed debt note, a deed of transfer, and sworn statements from 2 men saying you took a mineral marker from his office. The pendant belonged to my mother before Sloan ever came west. I know what he claims. I did not say I believed it. Will that stop you from arresting me?" Pike looked down at his hat. "Not if a territorial warrant comes." Jonah watched the shame move through the man's face. Pike was not bought in the clean way Sloan bought surveyors. His weakness came in smaller payments, feet extended on credit, a son's doctor bill settled. a promise that the town would keep its courthouse. Each favor tied another knot. Mara said, "My father left proof that Sloan altered the debt." Pike's head came up. "In the jail stove," she continued. "Behind the rear fire brick." Something in the sheriff's expression changed too quickly to hide. "You found it," Mara said. Pike put his hat back on. "Lower your voice. There is no one here but us. The mountains carry sound. So do frightened men." Jonah saw Pike glance toward the trail. "What was behind the brick?" he asked. The sheriff hesitated. "A ledger copy," he said at last, "signed by Edwin Lark. It shows Whitaker borrowed $800, not $4,000. The repayment date was next spring, not New Year's." Mara gripped the doorframe harder. "You have it?" "I moved it." "Where?" Pike shook his head. "You do not need to know. It is my father's proof. And if Sloan catches you with it, it burns. If he catches me with it, I hang before a territorial examiner arrives." Jonah said, "Why come here?" "To warn you. Sloan plans to ride as soon as the pass opens. He believes the blue stone marks the location of a silver deposit. He has hired men who do not care whether there is a warrant." Mara's mouth went pale. "Then arrest him." "With what? A copied ledger and my suspicion? Half the county owes him money. The judge stays in a room Sloan pays for. The telegraph operator is Sloan's cousin. You wear the badge." Pike absorbed the words without defending himself. "Yes," he said, "and I have worn it badly more than once." The admission left no easy target for Mara's anger. The sheriff turned to Jonah. "Get her west through the timber. There is a trapping line down toward the reservation. I can tell Sloan the North Trail avalanched." "No," Mara said. Both men looked at her. "I ran because I had one letter and no proof. Now the proof exists. I will not disappear so Sloan can keep my father's ranch and come after this mountain later." Pike's patience broke. "Miss Whitaker, men like Sloan do not become reasonable because you stand straight in front of them. They become embarrassed. Embarrassed men with money are dangerous. I know. Do you? I have seen his hired men drag a family out before breakfast and burn the roof by noon. I have seen them too. It was my roof." The sheriff closed his mouth. Jonah stepped off the porch and walked to Pike's horse. The animal's right front shoe was loose. He crouched, checked the hoof, and rose. "Your horse will not make the lower ice with that shoe," he said. "Put him in the shed. You can leave after he rests." Pike looked toward the cabin as though entering it would make him a conspirator. "You already are one," Mara said. He gave her a weary look. "You have your mother's manner." She went still. "You knew her?" "Only by sight. She came through Juniper Wells once, with you wrapped in a red blanket. Whitaker met her behind the church." "Why did no one tell me?" "Because the men asking questions carried army papers then. Later they carried mining papers. The questions never changed." Pike led his horse toward the shed. Inside, Jonah poured him coffee. Mara sat opposite the sheriff and placed the oilcloth letters on the table, though she kept one hand over them. Pike described the evidence in the jail stove. A carbon copy of the original note, Lark's statement that Sloan had replaced 2 pages in Whitaker's account, and a list of payments proving the debt had nearly been cleared. "Where is Edwin Lark?" Mara asked. "Dead." The word landed quietly. Pike rubbed the cup between his palms. "They found him in a dry well south of town. Sloan called it drink and misfortune. Lark's skull said otherwise." Mara stared at the stove. "You could have investigated." "I did. I also stopped when my deputy found a dead rattlesnake in his baby's crib." Jonah's jaw tightened. Pike continued, "Courage is easier to admire when it does not sleep in the next room from your children." Mara looked at him then, not with forgiveness, but with a more complicated understanding. "What happens if the ledger reaches a territorial judge outside Sloan's reach?" she asked. "The ranch transfer could be voided. The mineral claim might be suspended. It would not prove your pendant belongs to you, but it would expose his fraud. Who can carry it? A mail contractor comes through Pine Flat in 6 days. He is stubborn, federal, and hates Sloan. If I can get the packet to him, it reaches Prescott. Then do that." Pike gave a humorless smile. "You say it as though walking out my office with stolen evidence is no more difficult than carrying flour. Is it more difficult than climbing here in a blizzard?" The sheriff looked toward Jonah. "She has been awake 2 days and already sounds like you." "I talk less," Jonah said. For the first time, Pike laughed. It came out as a cough. He slept for 3 hours in the chair while his horse rested. Mara mended a tear in his glove without asking. When he woke and saw the repaired seam, he turned the glove over in his hands. "My wife used to do this," he said. "Used to?" "She died last spring." Mara nodded once. Grief recognized grief without requiring introduction. Before Pike left, Jonah replaced the loose horseshoe in the shed. The sheriff stood beside him, holding the animal's leg. Sloan's scouts are already testing the lower slope, Pike said under his breath. You have perhaps 4 days after the thaw begins. The canyon above Split Rock will slide, I know. So does Sloan? He knows nothing he cannot enter in a column. Jonah drove the final nail and rasped it smooth. That may help us. Pike set the hoof down. Do not build a plan that needs 20 frightened horses to behave sensibly. I never do. The sheriff mounted at the clearing's edge. Mara came outside to watch him go. If you take the evidence, she called, do not do it for me. Pike turned in the saddle. Do it because you are tired of lowering your eyes when he enters a room. The sheriff held her gaze, then nodded. His horse disappeared into the trees. For the rest of the day, Mara was quieter. She peeled potatoes, cleaned the bowls, and rewrapped her feet. Jonah worked at the bench. Making a pair of wooden-soled overshoes from scrap ash, he shaped them to keep her weight off the tender parts of her feet. You do not have to make those, she said. They are for the mare. She has smaller feet. She complains less. Mara moved her chair closer and watched him bore holes for the leather straps. Pike said I had my mother's manner. He may have meant it as a warning. What do you remember about her? Nothing. A hand on my hair. A song without words. The red blanket he mentioned. Jonah glanced at the turquoise at her throat. Memory keeps strange things. It kept fear very well. He set down the brace a bit. Fear is useful. It tells you where danger has been. Not where it is. No, Mara studied his face. What does yours tell you? That I should not let men on horses decide what happens inside my house. She smiled faintly. That seems very specific. It has had practice. The weather cleared that night. Stars appeared through a tear in the clouds, sharp enough to make the snow shine blue. Jonah went outside to split ice from the water trough. Mara followed in the wooden overshoes, moving slowly but without help. The cold made every sound distinct. The scrape of his shovel, the mare chewing hay, water dripping from the eaves where warmth leaked from the cabin. Mara stood near the fence and looked up. I forgot the sky could be this large, she said. In the valley it is cut into pieces by roofs and fences. Jonah drove the shovel under a slab of ice. Fences have uses. That is disappointing. I thought you hated all signs of civilization. I like gates, hinges, coffee mills. Chairs? One of them. She laughed softly. A line of light moved low across the southern trees. Jonah stopped. Mara saw his attention change. What? Lantern. Pike coming back? No horse. The light disappeared, then returned between the trunks. Whoever carried it walked slowly, leaning into the snow. Jonah took the rifle from the porch. Mara picked up the shovel. You stay here, he said. No, you cannot run in those shoes. Neither can the person out there. The figure reached the clearing 20 minutes later. He was an old man wrapped in a patched buffalo robe, using a long juniper staff. Snow clung to his gray braids. A canvas pack hung from one shoulder. He stopped outside the fence and looked at Jonah for a long time. You built the chimney too short, he said. Jonah lowered the rifle. Thomas, the old man's mouth twitched. You remember at least one useful thing. Jonah crossed the snow in 3 strides. He did not embrace Thomas. Neither man had ever been comfortable with embraces. Instead, Jonah took the pack from his shoulder and steadied his elbow. You were dead, Jonah said. I was busy. For 12 years, some work is slow. Thomas looked past him at Mara. The teasing left his face. He approached the porch, each step careful. Mara stood with the shovel in both hands. She did not move back. Thomas stopped several feet away. What name did they give you? He asked. Mara Whitaker. And the woman who carried you? I never knew her name. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were wet. Lena, he said. Her name was Lena. Mara's hands tightened around the shovel handle. Thomas looked at the pendant. May I see it? She hesitated, then unclasped the chain. She did not place it in his hand. She held it out where he could study the silver. He nodded. She kept it. Did you know my mother? I taught her to repair tack. She taught me that dried peaches can be ruined in 7 different ways. Mara's mouth trembled. Come inside, Jonah said. Thomas refused the chair closest to the stove and chose the barrel chair instead, complaining that comfort made a man careless. Jonah heated stew. Mara sat across from the elder with the pendant on the table between them. Thomas ate half a bowl before speaking. Sloan has found the old military report, he said. A scout described silver above a valley with a spring. The report does not give the route. Sloan believes Lena's stone does. He is right, Mara said, partly. Jonah placed his half beside hers. Thomas touched neither stone. When we split the turquoise, we believed 2 guardians would be safer than 1. We did not understand that we were giving 2 children a task that belonged to many adults. You gave Jonah his when he was 9, Mara said. I was afraid. The simple admission surprised her. Tomas continued. Soldiers had removed families from the lower river. Prospectors were searching the high canyons. Lena had a baby, and her husband had been killed. Whitaker offered to hide both of you. Jonah was the only child left on this ridge whose family knew the North Trail. We made a poor choice because all choices were poor. Why did my mother leave me with Whitaker? She was ill. Fever after the winter crossing. She believed she would recover and return. She did not. Mara looked down. Where is she buried? Near the old church at Juniper Wells, under the name Ann Hart. I have walked past that grave. Tomas nodded slowly. Then you were near her, even when you did not know. Mara rose and went to the window. Her shoulders were rigid. Jonah started to follow, but Tomas shook his head. After a while, Mara said, Did she steal anything? No. Did she know about the silver? Yes. Would she have let people mine it? That question is too small. Tomas leaned on his staff. The valley is not hidden because of one seam of ore. It holds a spring that feeds 3 creeks. It holds graves, old storage caves, and a stand of medicine plants that grows nowhere else on the ridge. The silver is simply what makes greedy men persistent. Mara turned from the window. Then why put the map in jewelry? Why not destroy it? Because people were scattered. We needed a way home. The answer reached her differently than any talk of sacred duty. Jonah saw it in her face. A way home, she repeated. Yes, not a deed, not a key to wealth, a route for people who had been driven away. Tomas took a folded cloth from his pack and opened it on the table. Inside lay a child's red blanket, faded almost brown with age. One corner had been patched with blue thread. Mara did not move. Lena left this with me before she crossed into the valley, Tomas said. She feared Whitaker's neighbors would recognize it. I kept it because I expected her to return for it. He pushed the blanket across the table. Mara touched the blue stitching with one finger. Her breath broke. She sat down, gathered the blanket to her chest, and bent over it without sound. Jonah turned toward the stove and gave her the privacy of his back. Tomas stared into his bowl. The cabin held her grief without trying to improve it. Later, after Mara had gone to the sleeping loft, Tomas and Jonah sat near the dying fire. You should have sent word, Jonah said. I sent 3 times. I received nothing. Then someone stopped it. Sloan? Perhaps. Perhaps Weather. The world does not need a villain for every loss. Jonah looked toward the loft. What do we do? Tomas rubbed his knuckles. What does she want? She wants to stand. Then do not turn her standing into another form of obedience. Jonah's irritation rose. I asked what we do about 23 men. And I answered. You always answer one question to avoid another. It keeps conversation lively. Jonah fed a small stick into the stove. The pass above Split Rock is unstable. When the thaw comes, the south wall will move. You are thinking of leading them into it. I am thinking of keeping them away from the cabin. You cannot command a slide. I can read one. And if you read it wrong, then I will be under it. Tomas looked at him sharply. That is not a plan. That is the old loneliness wearing a brave coat. Jonah's hands closed. The old man continued more gently. For years you have believed protecting a place meant standing between it and everyone else. Sometimes protection means letting others carry weight. Mara can barely walk. She will walk better in 4 days. I will not use her as bait. Then do not. Ask her what she chooses. At dawn, Mara came down wearing the red blanket over her shoulders. The storm had passed completely. Sunlight struck the snow with painful brilliance. The roof began to drip by mid-morning. They sat at the table with the map, the paired stones, Whitaker's letters, and Pike's warning laid out before them. Jonah explained the canyon. He showed Mara where the trail narrowed beneath a slope of loose red earth and dead cedar. Every spring, meltwater cut channels beneath the snow. A group of horses could start a slide. So could a rifle shot. So could nothing at all. If Sloan comes to the cabin, Jonah said, we cannot hold the clearing against that many men. But he does not want us dead until he has the route. If he sees the stones, he will follow. Mara traced the canyon line. Who carries them? I do know. You asked for the plan. I heard it. I am changing it. Tomas hid a smile behind his coffee cup. Mara looked at Jonah. Sloan thinks I am frightened and stupid. Let him keep thinking it. I will show him the stones. I will tell him I am taking him to the valley. You lead us by the stable path. Pike needs time to get the evidence to the mail contractor. We only need to stop Sloan for long enough. You cannot ride with your feet. I can sit a horse. You will be between armed men, so will you. That is different. Because you have spent more years preparing to die alone? Tomas set down his cup. Jonah's face went still. Mara did not retreat from what she had said. You told me choices are small when we make them. This one is mine. I will not stay behind a barred door while you carry the thing my mother died protecting. The roof dripped steadily outside. Jonah looked at the red blanket, the pendant, and the woman who had arrived curled in the snow. She was still pale. Her hands still bore the redness of cold, but nothing in her posture asked to be rescued. All right, he said. Mara released a breath. All right, what? You ride behind me until the canyon. You do exactly what I say on the unstable slope. That sounds less like agreement than command. It is the best I can offer. I will improve it later. Tomas chuckled. They spent the day preparing without ceremony. Jonah cleaned the mare's hooves, checked the saddle straps, and packed rope, dried meat, a small shovel, and 2 blankets. Mara copied Whitaker's letter in her own hand and sealed the original in oilcloth. Tomas drew an alternate route to Pine Flat for pike. By afternoon, small streams ran beneath the snow. The cabin roof released its burden in heavy slides. The air smelled of wet bark and old leaves. Mara stood at the edge of the porch, watching the white world begin to reveal dark ground. What happens after? She asked. Jonah was sharpening the shovel blade with a file. After what? After Sloan turns back. After Pike sends the proof. After the stones are safe. We repair what the thaw breaks. I meant us. The file paused. Jonah looked at her. Sunlight reflected from the snow onto her face, showing every tired line and every new certainty. I do not know, he said. It was the most honest answer he had. Mara nodded. Good, good. I am tired of men who claim to know the ending before I have chosen the next day. She stepped down into the softening snow and tested the wooden overshoes. Jonah returned to the shovel, but his hands were no longer steady. Near sunset, a crow called from the lower trees. Another answered farther down the ridge. Jonah listened. Scouts, he said. Mara drew the red blanket closer around her shoulders. Tomas rose from the bench and took his juniper staff. The first riders appeared below the pass as black marks moving across the last of the snow. The riders stopped beyond rifle range. There were 3 of them, all young enough to mistake a wage for loyalty. The man in front wore a yellow scarf and kept one hand near his revolver. The other 2 watched the cabin windows. Jonah stepped off the porch and walked to the fence. Mara remained beside Tomas, the red blanket around her shoulders. She had tucked the pendant beneath her dress, but Jonah could see the shape of it against the cloth. The man in the yellow scarf called, Calder, Mr. Sloan wants the woman. Then Mr. Sloan can want. He has a warrant. Show it. The rider took a folded paper from his coat and held it up. From here, Jonah said. The man smiled. Come closer. Jonah did not move. One of the other riders spat into the snow. We know she's there. Mara stepped forward. Then you have learned something. Ride back and enjoy it. The yellow scarf man squinted at her. Miss Whitaker, nobody needs trouble. Mr. Sloan only wants his property. My mother's necklace? The marker. There is no mine. Then you won't mind handing it over. Mara took the pendant from beneath her dress but kept it closed in her fist. A flash of blue showed between her fingers. All 3 men leaned forward in their saddles. Jonah saw greed simplify their faces. Mara said, Tell Sloan I know what it points to. The man with the yellow scarf looked at his companions. You know the route? I know enough to keep him from finding it without me. Jonah had argued against revealing that much. Now, hearing her say it, he understood the choice. Sloan might delay an attack if he believed he needed her alive and willing. Tell him to come himself, Mara continued. Tomorrow at noon. He brings Sheriff Pike and no more than 5 men. The rider laughed. You are not in a place to bargain. Mara opened her hand. The turquoise caught the low sun. I am the only person in this territory who can take him where he wants to go. The laughter stopped. The man in the yellow scarf studied her for several seconds. Tomorrow, noon, he wheeled his horse. The others followed, leaving churned holes in the soft snow. Jonah watched them disappear below the trees. You told them 5, he said. Sloan will bring 20. Yes. Then nothing changed. You made certain of it. Mara looked at him. He was coming with 20 whether I spoke or not. Now he comes believing he has won. Tomas tapped the porch with his staff. Confidence makes a poor man careless and a rich man foolish. Jonah turned toward him. You encouraged that. I admired it. Different thing. They went inside before dark. The room felt smaller after the riders left, as though their eyes remained at the windows. Jonah barred the shutters. Tomas prepared a paste of clay and ash to darken the mare's pale nose and tack, making her less visible against wet ground. Mara sat at the table writing 3 letters. One was to Sheriff Pike, describing Sloan's altered note and the threats that had driven her from the ranch. One was to the Territorial Land Office. The third began with the name Ann Hart, then stopped after a single line. Jonah set a cup of coffee beside her. "Who is the last one for?" "My mother." He waited. "I know she cannot read it. That has never stopped a letter." Mara looked down at the page. "I do not know what to call her. Mother feels borrowed. Lena feels like the name of a stranger Tomas remembers. You do not have to finish tonight. I have spent my life finishing things too late." Jonah pulled the barrel chair to the other side of the table. "Then write one true sentence." She studied the ink on her pen. At last she wrote, "I carried it farther than I thought I could." She folded the page and placed it with the red blanket. Tomas slept in the loft. Jonah insisted Mara take the bed, but she refused and spread blankets near the stove. "You will need sleep," he said. "So will you. I will watch until midnight. Then wake me." "No." Mara lay on one elbow. "We agreed I would carry weight. We agreed about the canyon. Agreement spreads." Jonah looked at her in the lamplight. "You have been here 4 days and already rearranged the rules." They were poorly arranged. At midnight he woke her. She sat at the table with the rifle across her knees while he lay near the door. The cabin settled around them with small familiar noises. Water ticked from the eaves. The mare shifted in the shed. Far down the ridge, a coyote called. Jonah slept for less than an hour. When he woke, Mara was humming. The tune had no words. It rose and fell in 3 quiet notes. He knew it. His mother had hummed the same melody while grinding corn. Jonah sat up. Mara stopped. "What? Where did you hear that?" "I don't know. I have always known it." He stared at her. "Tomas said our mothers traveled together before mine went to the valley," he said. "Maybe they learned it from the same woman." Mara touched the pendant. "Or it is only a common tune." "Maybe." Neither of them believed that was the whole answer. Jonah moved beside the stove. "Keep going. I cannot when someone is listening. I was listening before. That was different." "How?" "I did not know." He added a stick to the fire. After a while, Mara began again. The tune was uneven, half-remembered, but the cabin seemed to recognize it. At first light, they ate salt pork and biscuits. Tomas checked the sky, the snowpack, and the trickle running beneath the porch. "The south wall will loosen by afternoon," he said. "Too soon?" Mara asked. "Perhaps. The mountain does not consult plans." Jonah tied the 2 turquoise pieces into separate buckskin pouches. Mara wore hers beneath her dress. Jonah kept his inside his coat. If one were taken, Sloan would still lack the complete route. They saddled the mare and a small roan gelding Tomas had left hidden in the timber. The old man would not ride with them. "My knees argue with horses now," he said. "I will take the high footpath and watch the canyon." Mara frowned. "You walked through a storm to reach us. I complained the entire way. What happens if Sloan comes to the cabin before noon?" Tomas lifted the iron kettle from the stove. "I make coffee. Bad coffee. It has driven away better men." Jonah gave him a second rifle. By 11, the thaw had turned the clearing to mud. Snow slid from the north-facing branches in wet clumps. The horses stamped and flicked their ears at the distant sound of riders. Sloan arrived at 12 minutes past noon with 19 men. He rode a black horse, too fine-boned for the climb. His dark coat was clean, his gloves soft, and his hat brim held no sweat. He had likely changed at the sawmill so he could arrive looking untouched by the mountain. Sheriff Pike rode behind him. His expression gave nothing away. The yellow scarf scout pointed toward Mara. "That's the stone." Sloan raised one gloved hand, and the riders spread into a half circle. He looked at the cabin, the shed, the dripping roof. "Mr. Calder, I had pictured something less tidy." Jonah rested one hand on the saddle horn. "I had pictured you taller." A few men laughed before remembering who paid them. Sloan's smile held. "Miss Whitaker, you have caused considerable inconvenience." Mara stood beside the mare. The red blanket had been folded beneath the saddle. She wore her repaired coat and Jonah's overshoes hidden by the hem of her skirt. "You burned my home," she said. "A regrettable misunderstanding. My men believed the building empty. I was in the kitchen, and yet here you are. Providence has been kind." "No, Mr. Calder was kind. Providence sent the storm." Sloan's gaze moved to Jonah, measuring the distance between them. "You mistake temporary shelter for allegiance, Miss Whitaker. Men who live alone often have simple motives. A little money, a little company." Jonah felt Mara stiffen. She answered before he could. You have never understood a person you could not purchase. Sloan sighed as though she had disappointed him at dinner. This performance may impress the sheriff, but the law is plain. The Whitaker property transferred to my company. All claim markers and mineral records attached to it transferred as well. Pike said, the warrant concerns the alleged stolen marker. It does not name Miss Whitaker as property. Sloan turned his head slowly. Thank you, Sheriff. Pike's jaw moved. Mara asked, did you bring the original debt note? I brought certified copies. Of the altered one? A flicker crossed Sloan's face. Gone almost at once, it was still enough. The grief of losing a father can produce fantasies, he said. Charles Whitaker was a weak businessman. I gave him years he had not earned. You changed $800 to $4,000. Several riders looked at one another. Sloan's voice cooled. Be careful. I am being careful. That is why I copied his letter 3 times. Another flicker. This one did not vanish as neatly. Jonah saw Pike's fingers tighten on the reins. Sloan looked toward the sheriff. Have you seen these supposed letters? No. It was a truthful answer, narrow enough to serve. Sloan dismounted. Mud splashed his polished boots. He approached until he stood just outside the fence. Let us stop wasting daylight, he said. You claim you can locate the Mara lode. I can locate the valley named in the old report, Mara said. You will take us. I will take you and 5 men. Sloan smiled. No, the route crosses an unstable shelf. Too many horses will bring it down. He glanced at the slopes. Then we walk. It is 6 miles. My men are paid for effort. Jonah said, they are paid for silver. There may be none where we are going. A man near the rear muttered something. Sloan turned. There is enough silver to make every man here independent. How do you know? Mara asked. I have reports. You have a sentence written by a scout who saw color in rock from 50 yards away. Sloan's eyes sharpened. You have become unexpectedly informed. I had quiet company. For the first time, Sloan looked at Jonah not as an obstacle but as a rival. His pleasant manner thinned. I will take 10 men, he said. Sheriff Pike comes. The rest remain here. No one remains at the cabin, Jonah said. Sloan shrugged. Then all come. Mara stepped to the mare and placed 1 foot in the stirrup. Pain crossed her face, but she mounted. If the slope breaks because you brought too many, she said, your fortune will be under 30 feet of mud. Greed and caution fought behind Sloan's eyes. Caution lost only halfway. 8 men, he said. The sheriff and myself make 10. The others wait at the lower fork. The yellow scarf scout protested, Mr. Sloan, you will wait. The man closed his mouth. Jonah mounted the roan. He glanced at Pike. The sheriff touched 2 fingers to his coat pocket. A signal. The evidence had left his office. Jonah turned toward the north trail. They rode out in a narrow line, Sloan close behind Mara, Pike behind him, and 8 armed men following. The remaining riders moved down toward the fork. Tomas watched from somewhere above, unseen. The first mile climbed through fir and aspen. Meltwater ran over the trail, hiding holes beneath brown foam. Jonah kept the pace slow. Each delay made Sloan impatient and gave the sun more time to work on the south wall. Mara rode upright despite the pain in her feet. At a stream crossing, the mare slipped. Jonah reached for her rein, but Mara corrected the animal herself. Sloan noticed, you learned to ride at Whitaker's ranch. I learned to fall there. Charles spoke of you rarely. He was ashamed. Of you, of what he had allowed you to do. Sloan's mouth tightened. Your father came to me. I did not force him to borrow. You forced the numbers afterward. Business is force arranged politely. Pike said, that would sound poor in a deposition. Sloan looked back. You have been unusually talkative today, Sheriff. I slept badly. They climbed above the tree line. Wind moved across the open slope, warm enough to soften the snow beneath the horses. The ridge ahead rose in red steps, each one streaked with runoff. Jonah stopped where the trail divided. The left branch entered a broad basin and ended beneath a cliff. The right branch, nearly hidden behind scrub oak, led toward Split Rock Canyon. Sloan studied the ground. The survey report mentions a basin. It mentions a bowl, Jonah said. The canyon opens beyond the ridge. You expect me to trust you? No, Mara turned in the saddle. You can go left. By nightfall, you will reach a wall of basalt and perhaps understand why the route needed a marker. Sloan stared at the left trail. His desire to outsmart them was almost as strong as his desire for the silver. Pike's horse shifted. From high above came the cry of a hawk. Once, then twice, Tomas's signal. The first melt channel had opened along the south wall. Jonah took the right branch. They entered the canyon single file. Red cliffs rose on both sides, close enough in places for a rider to touch stone with an outstretched hand. Water ran beneath the snow with a hollow sound. Small rocks clicked down the slope. One of Sloan's men said, "Boss, this ground is moving. It is thawing. That is what moving ground does." Sloan ignored him. Halfway through the canyon, Jonah dismounted. "Horses stop here." Sloan looked at the narrow shelf ahead. "Why? The ledge will not hold them. Then we leave 2 men with the animals." Jonah tied the roan to a dead pine. Mara slid from her saddle, landing badly. He caught her elbow. "I am fine," she whispered. "You are lying." Yes, Sloan came close enough to hear. Touching, Mara pulled away from Jonah and faced him. "The route continues above that shelf. The stones must be warmed at the marker." "What marker?" "You will see." Sloan drew his revolver. The hired men grew quiet. Pike said, "That was not our agreement." "There was no agreement, Sheriff. There was delay." Sloan pointed the gun at Jonah. "Mr. Calder will walk first. Miss Whitaker follows. You will show me the route, and I will decide how many witnesses are necessary afterward." The politeness was gone. What remained was not wild rage, but a cold relief. Sloan preferred force. Manners had simply been cheaper until now. Mara looked at the revolver. "You cannot make the map work without both stones. Then I will keep both of you alive until it does." Jonah studied the shelf. Meltwater seeped from a crack above it. The mudslide would come, but not yet. The men were too close together. If the wall moved now, everyone would be caught. He raised his hands. "We walk." Pike dismounted. Sloan ordered 2 men to stay with the horses. The rest followed on foot. The shelf narrowed around a bend. On the left, the canyon floor dropped 20 feet into a channel of red water. On the right, wet earth rose steeply toward the unstable slope. Jonah placed each foot carefully. Mara followed, breathing through pain. Sloan stayed close enough that the barrel of his revolver sometimes touched the back of her coat. At the bend, they reached a flat stone shaped like an altar only because wind had worn it so. Jonah stopped. "Here," he said. Sloan looked around. "There is nothing." Mara took out her pendant. Jonah removed his. "Heat," she said. One of the men produced matches. Jonah shook his head. "Not flame. Warm stone." He placed the silver settings against the sun-heated rock and covered them with his palms. Mara did the same. This was not the true marker. The actual route branched a mile earlier beneath the scrub oak. But the false stopping place had been chosen because it sat directly below the most unstable wall. As the silver warmed, the etched lines appeared. Sloan crouched, his eyes fixed on the completed pattern. For a moment, he looked less like a predator than a hungry boy. Jonah understood then that the mine was not merely profit. Sloan had built his name on claims that repeatedly failed. Eastern investors were demanding returns. Without a discovery, his company would collapse, and with it the identity he had constructed from other people's losses. "This is it," Sloan whispered. "It is a route," Mara said. "Not permission." He reached for the stones. She closed her hand. Sloan pressed the gun beneath Jonah's jaw. "Give them to me." A pebble struck the flat stone. Then another. Jonah looked up. The surface of the south wall shivered. A line of wet snow folded over itself near the top. "Move back," he said. Sloan followed his gaze. A little runoff. The ground beneath them trembled. One of the hired men swore and ran toward the horses. "Back!" Jonah shouted. "Get around the bend!" The slope opened with a sound like timber splitting inside the earth. The first fall was not the whole mountain. It was a sheet of slush and loose shale that struck the shelf 30 yards above them and spread sideways, gathering branches, stones, and red clay. Jonah seized Mara by the back of her coat and pulled her toward the bend. Sloan grabbed for the turquoise. His boot slid. The revolver fired into the air, the shot flattened by the greater roar above them. Pike threw himself against the cliff. 2 hired men ran past, knocking one another toward the edge. One dropped to his knees and crawled. The other disappeared around the bend. "Leave the stones," Jonah shouted. Mara's fingers had locked around both pendants. She shoved them inside her coat and moved, one hand on the rock. Her damaged feet could not carry her quickly. Jonah put his shoulder beneath her arm. Mud struck the flat stone behind them. Sloan was still there. He had fallen against a juniper root at the edge of the channel. One leg hung over the drop. His revolver was gone. He clawed at the wet ground, but each movement pulled him lower. "Calder!" he shouted. Jonah looked at the oncoming wall. Mara saw Sloan. "We cannot reach him." Pike was already around the bend, waving them on. "Jonah!" Sloan's grip slipped. His body swung into the channel, held only by one hand tangled in the root. Jonah pushed Mara toward Pike. "Go!" She caught his sleeve. "No. Go now." He turned back. The mud reached the altar stone as Jonah dropped flat and slid toward the root. He caught Sloan's wrist with both hands. The force nearly pulled him over the edge. Sloan stared up at him, terror stripping years from his face. "Pull me." Jonah braced one boot against a rock. Mud washed over his legs. Small stones struck his shoulders. "Stop fighting me," he said. "I am not." "Stop." Sloan went still. Jonah hauled. Pike returned, grabbed Jonah's belt, and leaned backward. Together they dragged Sloan onto the shelf as the main rush hit. There was no time to stand. They crawled around the bend while clay and branches poured across the place where Sloan had been hanging. Mara waited beyond the turn despite Jonah's order, one hand extended. He caught it. They ran or stumbled or half fell toward the horses. The two men left with the animals had cut 3 reins and fled. The remaining horses fought the trees, eyes white, hooves tearing the softened ground. Jonah reached the roan and slashed its lead rope with his knife. "Do not mount," he yelled. "Lead them down." The canyon behind them filled with a heavy, grinding thunder. A second section of slope broke loose, larger than the first. It carried the dead pines that had stood above the shelf, trunks rolling end over end. The men scattered along the trail. Mara took the mare's rein. The animal lunged, dragging her several feet. Jonah caught the bridle and pulled its head toward him. "Look at me," he told the mare, though he was speaking as much to Mara. "Not the noise, this way." Pike helped Sloan onto a riderless bay. Sloan's right ankle bent badly, but he did not seem to feel it yet. They moved down the canyon in a broken line. Mud chased them, not as a single wave now, but in surges that covered the path, stopped, then broke forward again. The air smelled of torn roots, stone dust, and the sour sweat of terrified horses. At the narrowest cut, a pine trunk slammed between the cliffs and lodged shoulder high. Jonah ducked beneath it. Mara followed. The mare's saddle horn caught a branch. She pulled, but the horse reared. Jonah climbed onto a rock, broke the branch with the back of his knife, and slapped the animal through. Behind them, one of Sloan's men screamed for help. Pike turned. A young rider lay pinned beneath a fallen horse. The animal kicked weakly, its hindquarters trapped in mud. "We leave him, we kill him," Pike said. The main slide had slowed, but water and clay continued to rise around the horse. Jonah handed Mara the roan's rein. "Take them to the split trail." She looked at the trapped man, then at the slope. "I can help." "Then hold the horses steady. That is helping." This time she accepted the order because it named a real need. Jonah, Pike, and 2 hired men dug with their hands and a single short shovel. Sloan sat on the bay, clutching his ankle and shouting that they were wasting time. Pike turned on him. "Get down or shut your mouth." Sloan stared at the sheriff. Pike's badge was streaked with mud. Something in him had changed during the climb, or perhaps something old had finally stopped bending. The pinned rider was no more than 19. He cried without sound, biting his sleeve while Jonah cleared mud from his leg. The horse had broken its shoulder. Jonah saw the truth in the animal's eyes. "Get the boy clear," he said. They pulled the rider free. Pike dragged him toward Mara. Jonah stayed. He placed one hand on the horse's neck until it stopped struggling. Then he used Sloan's lost revolver, which he had found lodged near the trail, and ended the animal's pain with one shot. The hired men flinched. Jonah returned the revolver to the mud. At the split trail, the group counted itself. Everyone who had entered the canyon was alive. One man had a broken wrist. The young rider's leg was badly crushed. Sloan's ankle swelled inside his boot. 2 horses were lost, and the passage behind them had vanished beneath a wall of red earth, cedar trunks, and stone. The hidden valley was not buried. Jonah knew the true entrance lay elsewhere. But the route Sloan believed in would be impassable for months, perhaps years. Mara stood beside the mare, mud to her knees, the red blanket soaked and hanging from one shoulder. Jonah went to her. "Are you hurt?" "My feet are on fire." "That may be good. I dislike your good news." He checked her face, her hands, the way she held her ribs. She touched a cut above his eyebrow. "You went back for him," she said. "Sloan, you could have left him. So could you." "I did not move. No." Her expression held anger and relief in equal measure. "Do not do that again. I will add it to the rules." She laughed once, then began to shake. Jonah wrapped the red blanket around her, even though it was wet, and held her by the shoulders until the shaking slowed. Neither spoke. The hired men looked away. Sloan watched from the bay horse. Humiliation darkened his face more than pain. "You staged this," he said. Jonah turned. "I knew the slope was weak. You brought us under it. You brought 19 men after being warned to bring 5. You planned to kill me. If I had, you would still be in the channel." That answer silenced the clearing. Pike dismounted and walked to Sloan. "Give me your weapon." "I lost it. Your other one." Sloane's hand went toward the pistol beneath his coat. Pike drew first. The sheriff did not point his gun at Sloane's heart. He aimed at the mud near the horse's front feet, but the message was clear. "Slowly," Pike said. Sloane removed the second pistol and dropped it. "What authority do you imagine you have?" he asked. "The same authority you have been renting for 3 years. I have decided the lease is over." Sloane's face went pale. "You will lose your office, probably. Your house, maybe. Your son's apprenticeship." Pike's arm did not waver. "My son stopped speaking to me in March. Said he was ashamed to carry my name. You have run out of things I value more than that." The sheriff took a folded warrant from inside his coat and tore it in half. "This paper names a stolen company marker," he said. "No company seal, no description, no judge's original signature. I should have rejected it yesterday. You did not. No, yesterday I was a coward." Sloane looked toward the hired men. $500 to the man who takes that pendant." No one moved. He raised his voice. 1,000. The young rider with the crushed leg moaned. One of the men supporting him said, "You told us there would be a road. There will be. You told us the canyon was safe. I relied on Calder." Jonah shook his head. "I warned you." The man removed the cartridge belt from his waist and dropped it in the mud. Another did the same. Greed had brought them up the mountain, but fear and exhaustion were sending them down. Mara stepped toward Sloane. "You heard them," Jonah said quietly. "I need him to hear me." She stopped beside the horse. "My father feared you," she said. "Sheriff Pike feared you. Edwin Lark feared you. I feared you so much I walked into a blizzard rather than hear your riders behind me." Sloane looked down at her, still trying to recover the height of his position. "That fear made you think you were large." Mara continued, "You are not. You are only a man who learned where other people were weak." His expression changed. For an instant she had reached the part of him hidden beneath manners and money. Then he smiled. "And you are a woman with no house, no legal name that matters, and a necklace you cannot sell without betraying your dead mother. We are all made large by what others fear losing." Mara absorbed the cruelty without lowering her eyes. "Perhaps," she said. "But I still know what not to take." Pike ordered 2 men to make a litter from saddle poles for the injured rider. Sloane was allowed to remain mounted because of his ankle, though the sheriff tied his reins to another horse. They began the descent toward the lower fork. Jonah and Mara walked behind the group. The sun had dropped west, turning the wet cliffs dark red. Meltwater glittered in every crack. At the fork, the men who had waited there stared at the mud-covered procession. The yellow-scarf scout swore when he saw Sloane tied to Pike's saddle. "What happened?" "Your employer ignored the mountain," Pike said. "Are we under arrest?" "Not unless one of you reaches for a weapon." The scout looked at Sloane. Sloane said nothing. Pike arranged the injured men among the strongest horses. He would take them to Juniper Wells by the safer South Trail. Before leaving, he drew Jonah aside. "The evidence went out this morning," he said. "My deputy's wife carried it in a flour wagon. The mail contractor has it by now. Does Sloane know? He knows I betrayed him. That is enough. What will you charge him with?" "Nothing yet. I have statements to take, a dead clerk to reopen, fraud to prove." Pike glanced toward Mara. "But I can hold him overnight for threatening a federal witness if Miss Whitaker gives me a statement. She decides." "I know." Mara had heard. "I will give it." Pike nodded. "Come to town when you can walk without Calder glaring at the ground. He glares at everything." "True." The sheriff's expression softened. "Your father was not brave at the end, but he did leave a path toward the truth. Some men manage only that." Mara looked at the distant line of riders. "Then I will walk it farther." Pike mounted. Sloane twisted in his saddle to look back at Jonah. "You think a pile of mud changes ownership?" "No," Jonah said. "Then what do you think you won?" Jonah looked at Mara, who stood with the soaked red blanket around her and the turquoise hidden beneath her coat. "Time." The procession moved downhill. Sloane's black horse had been lost near the canyon, and the bay he rode belonged to one of his hired men. Without the black stallion, polished boots, and circle of armed riders, he looked smaller. Still dangerous, but human-sized. Jonah and Mara watched until the last horse disappeared among the trees. Tomas emerged from the scrub above the fork. "You took your time," Jonah said. "I am old. Also, I stopped to watch a rich man learn to limp." Mara leaned against a tree. "Did you know the wall would come down?" "I knew it wanted to. That is not an answer. You have been with Jonah too long." Tomas opened his pack and took out dry socks, a small bottle of liniment, and 3 pieces of hard candy. Mara stared. "You carried candy while we nearly died?" "I expected you to survive." He gave her the largest piece. They returned to the cabin by the stable path. Darkness came before they reached the clearing. Jonah walked beside Mara's stirrup, one hand near her ankle in case she slipped. Tomas led the roan and complained about young people choosing canyons when a good porch existed. The cabin door stood open. Jonah stopped. A lamp burned inside. He drew his knife and moved ahead. Tomas touched Mara's rein, keeping her back. Jonah entered through the side of the doorway. No one was there. On the table sat a loaf of bread, a crock of beans, and a folded note in Sheriff Pike's handwriting. My deputy came by the west trail. Sloan sent 2 men to search the cabin. Tomas's coffee drove them off, though I suspect the rifle helped. The original evidence is gone south. Burn this note. Jonah read it twice, fed it to the stove. Mara slid from the mare and nearly collapsed. He carried her inside despite her protest. I can walk. You have proved it. That does not mean you may carry me whenever an argument becomes inconvenient. Tonight it does. He placed her on the bed. Tomas removed the wooden overshoes while Jonah heated water. The skin on Mara's feet was swollen and raw but unbroken. They washed away the mud, wrapped them in clean cloth, and rubbed liniment into her calves. Once the work was done, Mara lay beneath the blanket staring at the ceiling. The stones, Tomas said. She reached inside her coat and took out both pieces. Mud filled the silver grooves. One leather cord had snapped, but the turquoise itself was intact. Jonah set a basin on the table. Mara cleaned each piece with warm water and a soft brush. Her movements were slow, almost tender. What now? She asked. Tomas sat near the stove. Sloan knows the pattern. He saw only part of it, Jonah said. He saw enough to keep searching. Mara fitted the 2 halves together on the cloth. Brown veins crossed the blue-like road seen from high above. We return them, she said. Jonah looked at her. To the hidden valley, to wherever they cannot be used again. Tomas nodded. There is a cleft above the spring, dry, deep, and known to few. When? Mara asked. When you can stand. I can stand tomorrow. Jonah said no. She lifted one eyebrow. 2 days, he amended. Better. Tomas stirred the beans. I will leave before then. Mara sat up. Why? Pike will need witnesses who remember Lena and the first survey. I am tired of hiding where only trees can hear me complain. You could be in danger. I have been in danger since before your mother learned to ruin peaches. Mara looked at the old man for a long moment. Will you come back? If the coffee improves? It was not a promise. She understood that and accepted it with visible effort. They ate after midnight. The bread was coarse and still faintly warm in the middle. Mara broke a piece and dipped it into the beans. Jonah sat on the floor with his back against the wall. Tomas occupied the good chair despite his earlier claim that comfort weakened character. No one spoke about victory. There were too many injuries below the ridge, too much uncertainty in town, and too much mud drying on their clothes. Instead, they discussed the mare's lost saddle blanket, the cracked handle on the shovel, and whether the roof leak had reached the loft. Ordinary matters returned one by one, small and steady. When Tomas began to snore in the chair, Mara looked across the room at Jonah. You saved Sloan because of me? She asked. No. The quick answer hurt her for a fraction of a second before he continued. I saved him because I was there. She considered that. Would you have done it before I came? Jonah looked at his hands. Mud remained beneath his nails. I do not know. That is honest. It seems to please you. It leaves room. For what? For tomorrow to change the answer. The lamp flame moved between them. Mara reached across the narrow space and put her hand over his. Her palm was warmer than it had been 4 days earlier. The rope scar at the base of her thumb rested against his knuckle. Jonah turned his hand beneath hers and held it. Nothing in the gesture demanded a name. Outside, water dripped from the eaves into the dark. Mara woke late the next morning to the smell of coffee and scorched oats. Jonah stood at the stove with a wooden spoon. Tomas was gone. His blanket had been folded on the chair. The juniper staff was missing from the wall. On the table lay the smallest piece of hard candy and a strip of paper weighted by a spoon. Mara read the note. The stove still smokes. The mare favors her left hind foot. Do not let Jonah make every silence into a wall. She read it twice. He left without saying goodbye. Jonah scraped the oats into 2 bowls. He prefers leaving people annoyed. Says they remember him longer. Did he speak to you? He called the chimney an insult to fire and walked down the west trail. You let him? Jonah set a bowl before her. No one lets Tomas do anything. Mara folded the note and placed it with her mother's letters. The next 2 days passed without riders. Pike sent no message. Smoke from the valley lay low against the southern horizon. but no lanterns moved on the trail after dark. Jonah repaired the cut reins, patched the saddle, and built a better brace for Mara's right foot. She washed every cloth in the cabin, even the ones that did not need it, because waiting made her restless. On the second afternoon, she found Jonah behind the shed resetting a trapline he had no intention of using until autumn. "You are avoiding me," she said. "I am tying wire. You have tied the same loop 3 times." He looked at his hands. The wire was indeed twisted into a useless knot. Mara leaned against the shed wall. Sunlight had opened bare patches in the clearing. The smell of wet soil rose through the snow. "Are you sorry I came?" she asked. Jonah's head lifted. She continued before he could answer. "Not that you found me. I know what you would say. You were there. You did what was in front of you. I mean now." The cabin was quiet. Sloan did not know this ridge mattered. Tomas was a memory you could argue with privately. Jonah unwound the wire. "Quiet is not always peace. That sounds like something Tomas would say." "I disliked it when he did." Mara waited. He set the snare aside. "For a long time I believed solitude was a debt I paid to keep the valley safe. If no one came close, no one could follow. If I needed nothing, no one could take it. And then I fell in your snow. Yes, I have poor timing, the worst." She smiled, but her eyes remained serious. Jonah said, "I am not sorry." The answer was low and plain. It warmed her more than any promise could have. "Good," she said, "because tomorrow I am climbing to the cleft." He looked at the brace on her foot. "I can manage. You will ride to the upper meadow and walk from there, with a rope. If the rope makes you less unbearable, it may." They left before sunrise. The air had cooled overnight, firming the mud. Jonah rode the roan and led the mare, allowing Mara to sit sideways with her feet clear of the stirrups. The pared stones rested in a buckskin pouch inside her coat. She had wrapped her mother's red blanket around the saddle roll, dry now but permanently stained from the canyon. They did not use the route shown on the silver. Jonah led her west through a stand of white fir, then north along a shelf hidden by scrub oak. The trail climbed above the blocked canyon. From a lookout they could see the slide spread below like a fresh scar, red earth, gray branches, patches of old snow. Mara searched the lower road. "Do you think Sloan is in jail?" "Not for long. Does that trouble you?" "Yes. You never sound troubled. I save it." "For what?" "Bad coffee." She shook her head. Beyond the lookout, the land changed. The forest opened into a high meadow where snowmelt ran in silver threads through flattened grass. Tiny yellow flowers pressed close to the ground. A hawk circled above the ridge, its shadow passing over them once. Jonah dismounted near a spring no wider than a wash basin. Clear water rose through dark gravel and spilled toward the meadow. Mara knelt to drink. The cold hurt her teeth. "This feeds the lower creek?" she asked. "Part of it, so a mine above it would poison more than the valley." "Yes." She looked at the water running over her fingers. The reason for the map felt suddenly practical and immediate. Not legend, not inheritance, but water moving downhill toward animals, fields, and people who might never know where it began. They left the horses at the meadow and climbed on foot. Jonah tied a rope loosely between them, not to pull Mara, but to catch her if the weakened foot slipped. The path crossed a slope of broken granite. Each step made a dry scraping sound. Above them, the ridge narrowed to 2 dark teeth against the sky. Mara's breath shortened. She stopped twice, angry at her body. Jonah waited without looking impatient. At the second stop, she said, "You may tell me this is foolish." "It is. I expected comfort. You said I may tell you. Next time I will be more precise," they continued. The cleft was hidden behind a slab of stone that looked solid from below. Jonah turned sideways and entered a narrow opening. The air inside smelled of dust, cold rock, and something green from the spring below. The passage widened after 20 feet into a small chamber open to a crack of daylight. No silver glittered in the walls. There were no carved altars or heaps of treasure, only stone. A few old pottery fragments left undisturbed and a deep fissure at the back. Mara stood quietly. "This is where Tomas meant?" she asked. Jonah nodded. "Have you been here once?" "He brought me after he gave me the pendant." "How old were you?" 9. "Were you afraid of the dark?" She looked surprised. "I was 9, he said. Mara took out the buckskin pouch. The 2 pieces of turquoise fell into her palm. In daylight, they looked smaller than the burden they had carried. The blue was uneven, scratched at one corner. The silver settings were black in the grooves despite her cleaning. She fitted them together. The brown lines joined and the etched root became whole. Jonah stood beside her but did not touch the stones. "If we leave them here," she said, "people may need the route someday. Some still know it. People die, letters burn. Children are told silence will protect them. Jonah heard the question beneath her words. We can separate them again, give one to Pike, one to Tomas. No, then Sloan or the next man hunts people instead of stone. She walked to the fissure and looked down. It descended beyond the light. A narrow ledge inside was dry and hidden from the entrance. Mara held the pieces over it, then stopped. My mother carried this across the territory, she said. You wore yours for most of your life. Dropping them feels like throwing away what they endured. Jonah said, They endured so you could choose. Her eyes closed. She did not drop them. Instead, she knelt and placed the joined turquoise on the ledge. She pushed it back beneath an overhang where water could not reach. Then she covered the opening with 3 flat stones, fitting them carefully until no blue showed. She rested her palm on the last stone. I do not know your language. She whispered to the mother she had never known. I do not know the name you would have given me, but I came back. The chamber returned no answer. It did not need to. Jonah waited until she stood. On the descent, Mara slipped once. The rope tightened. Jonah braced and caught her weight. She looked up at him from one knee. You may not mention that. I will write it down. With your expensive jokes? In the savings ledger. At the spring, they ate dried meat and the last 2 biscuits. Mara washed dust from her hands. Without the pendant, her throat looked strangely bare. She touched the empty place several times before noticing. Do you miss yours? She asked. Jonah considered. My neck is colder. That is not what I asked. No. Why not? Because it did its work. Mara watched the stream leave the meadow. I thought I would feel empty, do you? No, lighter, and angry that being lighter required so much trouble. That will pass. The anger? The surprise. They returned to the cabin at dusk. A rider waited by the fence. Jonah reached for the rifle tied to the saddle before recognizing Pike's deputy, Samuel Orr. He was a narrow man with red hair and a bandage around one hand. Sheriff sent this, Orr said. He handed Mara a sealed envelope. Inside was a brief note. Sloan had been released after the judge refused to hold him without a formal charge. However, the Territorial Land Office had received Edwin Lark's ledger copy. A suspension had been placed on the Whitaker transfer and all mineral activity tied to Sloan's claim. An examiner would arrive within a month. Pike had reopened the investigation into Lark's death. Below that, in a different hand, someone had written, The mail contractor enjoyed carrying something Sloan wanted stopped. Mara read the note aloud. What will Sloan do? She asked Orr. Left town this morning in a hired wagon, ankle in splints. Took 2 trunks and his bookkeeper. Running? Calling on investors, he says. Jonah asked, and the men who rode with him. 4 gave statements. The boy with the leg may lose it below the knee. Doctor cannot say yet. Mara folded the note slowly. The victory, if it was one, had a cost attached to it. Does he have family? She asked. A mother in Tucson. Tell Pike I will pay what I can for the doctor. Orr looked surprised. That boy came to take you. He also believed a liar. The deputy nodded. Before leaving, he gave Jonah a cloth parcel from Tomas. It contained dried chilies, a small hand drill, and another note. The courthouse coffee is worse. I may remain until justice improves it. Jonah handed the note to Mara. She smiled. He will be there forever. 3 weeks later, Mara rode into Juniper Wells. Her feet had healed enough for boots, though she still limped after long distances. Jonah came with her but let her ride ahead when the road reached the first houses. The town had changed little since her escape. Dust lay against the boardwalks. A dog slept beneath the barber's steps. The bell above the mercantile door gave the same cracked ring. Yet people watched her differently. Some had heard about the canyon. Some knew the land office had frozen Sloan's claim. Others simply saw that she had returned without chains. Sheriff Pike met her outside the jail. He wore a clean shirt and looked older. Sloan's lawyer filed 6 objections, he said. The examiner rejected 4. The other 2 will take time. Will I get the ranch back? Likely. Likely is not a roof? No. Can anyone enter it? Legally, no. In practice, the front door is gone. Mara nodded. I want to see it. Pike glanced at Jonah. You both should come inside first. The examiner needs her statement. Mara went alone. Jonah sat on the bench outside the jail for 2 hours, carving a replacement toggle for his coat. Townspeople passed. Some greeted him. Others crossed the street. He treated both reactions the same. When Mara emerged, her face was drained. Pike held the door. She did well. Mara ignored him. I am going to the ranch. Jonah stood. The Whitaker place lay 1 mile east of town. The barn had burned to the foundation. Half the house roof was gone, and rain had warped the parlor floor. In the kitchen, soot blackened the wall above the stove. A broken plate remained beneath the table where it had fallen the night Mara fled. She walked through each room without speaking. In her father's bedroom, the loose floorboard had been pried up. The hiding place beneath it was empty except for a button. Mara picked up the button. It was horn, brown, with thread still caught in the holes. "My father's coat," she said. Jonah stood in the doorway. "He sat there when he wrote the letter." She pointed to a chair burned black along one side. "I was in the next room. I heard the pen scratching. I thought he was changing the will again." She opened a wardrobe. Smoke-stained dresses hung inside. On the top shelf sat a small wooden sewing box. Mara took it down. "That is all?" Jonah asked. "All I want." Outside, a wagon stopped by the gate. A woman named Mrs. Alvarez climbed down with 2 children. Her husband had worked for Whitaker before Sloan dismissed him. "Sheriff said you might come," she told Mara. "We have been keeping the cattle on the south lot, only 6 left. Are you living nearby?" "In my sister's room, 5 of us." Mara looked at the roofless house, then at the children. "When the transfer is voided, you can lease the land," she said, "for $1 the first year. Repair costs count toward later rent." Mrs. Alvarez stared. "Miss Whitaker, that ranch is yours." "I know." "You are not staying?" Mara looked toward Jonah. He did not answer for her. "No," she said. "But I do not want Sloan to have burned it empty." Mrs. Alvarez began to cry. Mara became uncomfortable and handed her the sewing box while she moved a fallen board from the doorway. That evening she visited the old churchyard. Anne Hart's grave stood near the back fence beneath a cottonwood. The stone was small and gave only a name and year. Someone had recently cleared weeds from it. "Thomas," Jonah said. Mara knelt and placed the brown horn button at the base of the marker. She had brought no flowers. Winter had left none worth picking. "I wrote you a letter," she said quietly. "I left it in the mountain." Jonah waited by the fence. When Mara returned, she slipped her hand into his. They stayed at the hotel because Pike refused to let them ride after dark. Mara slept badly in the soft bed. Wagon wheels, saloon music, and voices on the boardwalk kept waking her. Near midnight, she knocked on the wall between rooms. Jonah opened his door, wearing one boot and holding the other. "Are you leaving?" she asked. "I thought there was trouble." "There is. The mattress is trying to swallow me." He looked past her into the room. "Fight harder. Your sympathy remains costly." She sat on the hallway floor. He sat beside her. For a while they listened to a piano missing one high key. "People here think I am brave," Mara said. "You came back. I was more afraid giving the statement than I was in the canyon." "Bravery is badly measured. I told the examiner about Whitaker, about the days he locked me in the pantry, about Sloan using the debt to make him sign papers. None of it felt related to a mineral claim, but Pike said it showed coercion. Jonah's shoulder touched hers. "I kept thinking my father would hear me and be ashamed. He is dead, I know. That does not end an argument. No." She leaned her head against the wall. "I do not hate him every day. That feels like betrayal. Of whom? Myself, perhaps." Jonah thought about his father teaching him to plane cedar smooth, then forbidding him to speak his mother's language in town. Love and damage had lived in the same house. "You do not owe your pain perfect loyalty," he said. Mara turned to him. "Where did you learn that?" "I did not. I am trying it." She rested her head on his shoulder. They sat until the piano stopped. By late April, the examiner voided Sloan's transfer of the Whitaker ranch. A broader investigation began into his company's debts and land claims. He did not return to Juniper Wells. Rumors placed him in Denver, Santa Fe, and once on a train east with 2 empty sample cases. Pike kept his badge, though the county board reduced his pay. His son came home for a week and repaired the jail roof. Tomas returned to the ridge carrying a new coffee pot stolen, he claimed, from no one who deserved it. Spring climbed slowly toward the cabin. Snow withdrew into shadows beneath the firs. The meadow grass rose green and bright. Jonah repaired fences, planted beans, and moved the stovepipe higher after Tomas threatened to dismantle it himself. Mara remained. At first there was always a reason. Her feet needed time. The examiner might send questions. The trail to the ranch was muddy. Mrs. Alvarez needed space to settle. Then the reasons became less necessary. She planted onions beside the cabin. She hung her mother's red blanket above the bed after washing it in spring water. She rebuilt the barrel chair with a straight back. She taught the mare to stand while being saddled. Jonah built a second shelf in the cupboard because her sewing box took up the first. They argued about small things with increasing ease. He stacked bowls upside down. She said it trapped damp. She left the axe in the wrong place. He moved it without speaking until she moved it back. He preferred coffee boiled black. She added eggshell to settle the grounds. One morning he found his silent breakfast replaced by a list of roof repairs, written in charcoal on a board. At the bottom Mara had added, "Build another room before winter." Jonah read it twice. When she came in carrying kindling, he asked, "For whom?" "For anyone who dislikes sleeping beside the stove." "That could be you." It could. He waited for the old fear to rise, the instinct that more walls meant more to lose. It came but smaller than before. "East side gets morning light," he said. Mara set down the kindling. Yes, they began after the planting. The room took 6 weeks. Jonah cut cedar. Mara stripped bark and mixed clay chinking with straw. Tomas appeared whenever the work was nearly finished and criticized the foundation. Pike sent 2 windows salvaged from the old courthouse. Mrs. Alvarez brought a blue quilt from the Whitaker house. The only bedding smoke had spared. On the day they set the final window, rain came over the ridge. Mara stood inside the unfinished room and watched water bead on the glass. "It does not leak," Jonah said. "Yet you learned optimism in town?" "I learned roofs." He came to stand beside her. The rain smelled of dust, pine, and new-cut wood. Mara touched the place at her throat where the turquoise had rested. "I used to think the stone was the only thing that proved I belonged anywhere," she said. Jonah looked at the room, the muddy boots near the door, the sewing box on the shelf, and the onions pushing green from the garden. "What proves it now?" he asked. She took his hand and placed it against the window frame they had raised together. "This needs no proof." The first winter after the blizzard arrived gently. Jonah still checked the sky at noon. He still counted wood and listened for the pitch of the wind. Mara still woke when distant horses crossed the lower pass. Some habits did not vanish because danger had moved away, but the cabin was no longer arranged for one person. 2 coats hung by the door. 2 cups sat near the stove. The good chair had become Tomas's by common agreement, though he visited rarely enough to complain each time. The east room held the blue quilt and a narrow desk where Mara copied letters for neighbors who could not write. On the anniversary of the storm, snow began before dawn. Mara found Jonah behind the cabin splitting cedar. "You have enough for 4 days," she said. 5. "You counted?" Twice. A gust lifted snow from the roof. Beyond the clearing, the path from the lower pass disappeared into white. Mara looked toward the place where she had fallen a year earlier. Jonah followed her gaze. Neither spoke of what might have happened if he had gone inside 10 minutes sooner, or if she had turned toward the creek instead of the cabin. The unanswered possibilities had lost their power. She picked up 1/2 of the split cedar and carried it to the porch. Jonah took the other. Inside, the stove was warm. Bread rose beneath a cloth, the mare stamped in the shed. On the wall above the table hung no map, no turquoise, no legal paper, only the faded red blanket, patched with blue thread. Mara poured coffee. Jonah tasted it and frowned. "Eggshell. It settles the grounds. It ruins the bitterness. You have enough bitterness stored." He sat at the table. She took the chair beside him. Outside, the snow deepened over the old path. Inside, the room smelled of cedar smoke. Bread and coffee that Jonah claimed not to like, but finished anyway.